Bismillah, alhamdulillah, as-salatu was-salam ala rasulillah. Thank you for joining me. I want to start a semi-regular vlog where I just talk about whatever issue comes up and I feel needs addressing. So, a lot of people think I'm a jerk, and I get this criticism about my writing style and about the way that I speak about certain issues. If you're not familiar, I've been writing on a Facebook page for over 2 years. And on that page, sometimes I'm a little bit aggressive on the things that I discuss. And I definitely don't take a diplomatic tone on a lot of it. And so some of the main things that I talk about are liberalism, feminism, kind of progressive Islam. I talk about LGBT rights issues, social justice, warrior kind of aggressive discourse. So these are the topics that, among the topics I address, and people finds my tone sometimes too harsh or not diplomatic enough. And they criticize me for this, sometimes to my face, sometimes behind my back. And I think this is something that I should address because it's something that I deliberately do, and I have reasons why I take a certain tone on these subjects. And I think that we should recognize that people don't really have a problem with the tone. I think that's really clear. It's not having a aggressive, harsh tone in and of itself that makes people uncomfortable. And I know this because there's all kinds of harsh, aggressive language that's used when it comes to a host of other topics. If someone is criticizing Donald Trump, or people are talking about racism on social media, or they're denouncing Zionism or the actions of Israel or anything of that nature, people use harsh, aggressive language. Muslims, American Muslims, will use very even insulting language to criticize these things. And no one bats an eyelash at that. No one finds that problematic. Oh, you're too aggressive when you're criticizing Donald Trump. You're too aggressive when you're criticizing neo-Nazis or white supremacists. So it's not the tone in and of itself that people have a problem with. It's the subject matter, the target of the criticism. And the fact of the matter is that I criticize ideologies that are not typically criticized, ideologies that many Muslims might find close to their hearts, for better or worse. And so they take my kind of aggressiveness very personally, and they're offended by it. So that's, I think, the crux of the issue. It's not my tone, it's just the things that I criticize. Otherwise, people should be getting criticized for using a harsh tone with Donald Trump or whatever else. So, I think that's important to recognize. And then, it's not always a problem. Another criticism I get is that, well, Daniel, you're not going to be able to convince people when you are undiplomatic. If you want to convince people, you can attract people better with honey as opposed to vinegar. And so just try to, be a little bit more diplomatic, be less harsh, be less sarcastic, and you'll find people a lot more receptive to your ideas. And what I say to this is that not everything is about convincing the other side, right? Not everything is this process of trying to get the other side to accept your views. There are many nuances and contexts in which you wouldn't want to use that kind of tone. In fact, you'd want to be very, firm, and you'd want to be very undiplomatic and very confident in your views and your positions. And so as Muslims, we definitely want to have that kind of posture, not necessarily in all of our discourse, But there are certain scenarios and certain contexts where we do need to be very confident and very, this is what we believe. And we see this within the Sunnah as well. We see this in the example of the Prophet, peace be upon him, as well as other Anbiya. When we look in the Quran and we see the narratives of other prophets, there were also contexts where they weren't necessarily being diplomatic. And within the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, my favorite example is with Hassan ibn Thabit, the Sahabi radiallahu anh. And he was gifted in poetry. And so what the Prophet ﷺ would have him do is write poetry that made fun of and would kind of lampoon and abuse the Quraysh, the mushrikeen. And so this is something that he would even say, Ya Hassan, lampoon, criticize, abuse the Quraysh. And when you're doing so through your poetry, Jibril is even with you, right? And that's how elevated and how honored Hassan was. And even though what he's doing is not diplomatic, right? The Quraysh aren't going to be happy to hear about this poetry that's insulting them or that's lampooning them. But that wasn't the point of it. The point of it was to establish the truth, to rally the Muslims and to give them that confidence and to give them that boost in their spirit. And I think we need more of that in Muslim discourse. We need less apology. We need less of this kind of inferiority, this internalized inferiority that I see with a lot of Muslim discourse, especially when it's on the topic, especially in those areas where Islam conflicts, right? Islam conflicts with the overall cultural narrative, which is so heavily influenced by ideologies like liberalism, feminism, scientism, atheism, secularism, and so forth. So it's not all about convincing the other side. Yes, there's a context for that. For example, if I'm talking to someone one-on-one, friends, family, or coworkers, I'll want to speak in a very diplomatic way. And I don't want to offend their sensibilities in that one-on-one setting, in most circumstances. So given that, yeah, of course, we have to be diplomatic. But in the context of wider public discourse, okay, where I'm not speaking one-on-one with a person, I'm speaking to the discourse as a whole, then yes, it's important for some voices to be more aggressive and bolder, less apologetic, less diplomatic, and so forth. The other thing I've noticed is that Muslims have a lot of internalized inferiority. And that is a phenomenon that you see with when there's minority groups within a larger culture, within a larger population, is that the minority group will internalize this sense of inferiority. And within the modern world, we're not talking about in minority in terms of population numbers, but we're talking about minority in the sense of what are the ideologies and the truth claims that are considered at the top of the food chain, so to speak, or are considered to dominate, be the dominant discourses of humanity. And you have certain ideologies, liberal secularism, feminism, scientism, atheism, that have this claim to rationality. They claim to be the most rational, scientific, compelling, consistent thought systems and ideologies. And Islam and religion in general are much further down the ranking, right? And so we're minority in that sense. We're minority in that our deen is seen as inferior, is seen as not as rational or even irrational, barbaric, terroristic compared to other thought systems and belief systems. And so if we internalize that, because that's what we get from our education system, right? Even education in the Muslim world, religious knowledge is seen as very low on the list of priorities, and scientific knowledge, secular knowledge, that's seen as, okay, this is what the world is really about. This is what truth is really about. And so if you have an education system that hammers that into the Muslim mind, you have a media system, you have the internet, you have TV, you have all of these influences that continuously pound home the message that Islam is low on the totem pole, and these other ideologies, that's the truth. Well, you hammer this into people's heads, then that's what they internalize, that's what they think. And then if someone comes around and says that, well, actually, no, if we look at liberal secularism more closely and we critique it, or we critique feminism, or we critique evolutionism, we critique scientism, naturalism, and they're not all they're made out to be, then that can be seen as offensive by its very nature. That can be seen as aggressive in its very nature. But that's the kind of critique that Muslims need to be doing by virtue of just being Muslim, right? We're Muslims. This is our deen. Okay, this is the message that was revealed to all of humanity, not just Muslims. And so we accept it and recognize it as the truth, and we claim that it's the truth, and that's our position, and we convince others. We need to convince others that, yes, this is the truth, and we need to be confident about that. We need to have confidence and our own kind of intellectual fulfillment in claiming that. But that's a very hard task. That's a very grueling, it can be very psychologically, mentally grueling when you're going up against these established systems that the entire modern world is based off of. And so my writing and research is very much concerned about kind of shifting this and turning the narrative, turning the tables on this whole idea. But the thing is, what I'm finding is that there's a lot of internalized inferiority of Muslims, where they will even push back and they'll say, well, how dare you claim that Islam, is the truth? These are, supposedly Muslims, right, who are criticizing me and saying, why are you being so, uncompromising about the truth of Islam, right? Like, aren't you a Muslim, right? And they privately message me on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, say, you're too aggressive. Like, why do you act like Islam is, the final truth? I'm like, wait, if you're a Muslim, you should believe this too. Like, you should have that position too. You should be happy, not necessarily me, but for anyone to be defending that and upholding that and championing that. So this is the kind of internalized inferiority that I feel is at the basis of not all, but some of the criticism that I get. People find it threatening also, right? That if you insult, when you have this kind of brazen attitude, brash attitude towards these ideologies like feminism and liberalism, secularism, then, that's inappropriate. Right? You have to be very polite, you have to be very gentle, you have to be very accommodating and diplomatic. Why? Like, why? I don't have that kind of respect for falsehood. I don't have that kind of respect for something that is outright wrong and is very destructive and has caused all kinds of chaos and turmoil and pain and suffering in the world today, as I write about and lecture about and have been for years. So I'm not going to have that kind of reverence for something that is not worthy of that reverence, right? But Muslims, okay, forget about non-Muslims. Muslims find that problematic. They find it offensive and threatening, and it makes them uncomfortable. A Muslim is not supposed to talk like this. We have to be reverential. We have to be deferential. We have to speak in this kind of polite, diplomatic, apologetic way. Yes, Islam is all about liberty and equality and so forth. The other thing that is really important to me is understanding the playing field, basically, the playing field of competing voices that are speaking about Islam, that are speaking about Muslims in the modern world. And you have within, the Muslim communal discourse, you have very loud, very aggressive, even obscene voices from, progressive, reform Muslims, liberal Muslims that are really pushing the envelope when it comes to their demands for reforming Islam. And they're threatening imams, they're threatening masajid, they're bullying community leaders to accept their kind of liberal vision, their reform vision for Islam. And these voices are very self-righteous. They speak very arrogantly. They speak very obscenely at times to get their way, and they feel that that's justified because they're trying to bring Islam and the Muslim community into the light of the modern world, right? And so if you think of this playing field and this whole spectrum, they're on one side of it. Okay, they're on one side of the spectrum, and then they have a monopoly on the emotional discourse within the Muslim community. So what's counterbalancing that? Right now there is no balance, okay? Because everyone on the other side, the people who do have the knowledge, right? The scholars, the imams, for the most part, at least within the context of the US, and maybe less so in the UK, but definitely in the US, you have the people that have the most knowledge and have the most claim to speak very confidently and aggressively about what's right and wrong, who have the authority, the religious authority, to put the other side, put them in their place. They're being very quiet on a lot of issues, and they're being and when they're not quiet, then it's their speech lacks kind of emotionality on these very important hot button issues when it comes to women's issues regarding feminism, when it comes to LGBT, same-sex marriage, when it comes to these larger questions of Islam and the state, Islam and governance, political Islam. These are big major issues, and the side that needs to be kind of the most bold in talking about that, because they have the truth, they are following the Quran and the Sunnah, they're being very diplomatic to a fault. They're being it can be even described as being silent on a lot of these issues. And so all of that emotional weight is not being counterbalanced, that is coming from these reformist, progressives, etc. And so what that does is that it shifts, like they're continuously pushing the envelope, they're continuously being bolder, being more aggressive. I remember 10 years ago, you had hardly anyone within the Muslim community advocating for, so-called LGBT rights. Only like a very fringe minority, and even that fringe minority would speak kind of reverentially or deferentially, right? If they tried to make an argument about same-sex marriage, they would try to do some kind of tafsir of the Quran. They would try to cite something. Okay, they would at least have enough respect for the tradition of Islam to try to justify it in this kind of a clumsy, dishonest way, but at least they would try. They would like speak about these texts, and they'd try to justify their view with reference to the tradition. And so, if you read the work of Scott Kugel, who tries to justify and say that, well, the Quran doesn't prohibit same-sex sexuality, he will try to make this argument with reference to the Quran itself, with reference to tafsir. I mean, it's a completely wrong argument, and it's completely dishonest, and he distorts a lot of the things, and his book is a failure in that sense, but at least he made like an attempt at that. But now that same group advocating for LGBT in Islam, they don't even care about citing Quran. They don't even care what the Quran says about the topic. All they care about is like, this is what is justice, this is what is right, this is about equality, their twisted version, understanding of equality. And so they won't even bother with Quran and Sunnah. They won't even bother with Islamic scholarship or the tradition. So they're constantly pushing the envelope. They're pushing the envelope. And then what's on the other side to counterbalance that? And so we need voices, okay, who will all speak with emotion, okay? If you look at our tradition, many scholars were very emotional and spoke in an aggressive way, and sometimes were very harsh, and sometimes they would mock opposing sides. Sometimes they would use sarcasm. Sometimes they'd use humor. So that was a very live human tradition, right? The scholarship was very humanistic in that sense. It wasn't this kind of bland, sterilized, apologetic, diplomatic discourse that we find today, where, oh, God forbid someone is aggressively denouncing some new fahisha that people are flocking towards. Like, no, it wasn't like that at all. And so we need to restore that balance. That's what I'm trying to do when I write in an aggressive way on certain topics, right? Why not? Why not speak with the haqq, speak the truth, right? The truth is something that is clear. And we have, as Muslims, we have to be proud that we're Muslims, that we have the truth, and we should speak it. And these are not things that, and these issues are not things that are, there are a difference of opinion on within Islam, or they're kind of like minority opinions, or there's a difference of opinion. These are things that are consensus issues. Everyone agrees on them. Only today, only in modern times, have these kind of deviant Muslims started questioning, for example, whether same-sex behavior is permissible or not. It's only, that kind of deviancy is only today. In the past, there was no question. It was, it was ma'lum min ad-din bid-durura. It was known by necessity of the religion. So on those issues, and there are many of them, we can't have this kind of very apologetic tone about us. So in a nutshell, that's why I deliberately have an aggressive, harsh, unapologetic tone in some of my writing. It is deliberate. I'm not trying to, unnecessarily anger people or insult or offend people. And I avoid obscenity. Like, I'm not going to stoop to the level of others in what I write and what I say. But there's nothing wrong with being upfront and being bold, and sometimes being sarcastic, sometimes being mocking of the things that out there in the world today that are opposing Islam and are attacking Islam. Okay, we need to get out of this internalized inferiority complex. Okay, we have to be proud of truth, right? The kuffar are very proud of their falsehood. So why can't we be proud of our truth? And why can't we speak the truth and speak in the best way? Okay, when we speak in the best way, that doesn't mean always speaking in a muted way or in an apologetic, a deferential way. No, sometimes speaking in the best way requires speaking forthrightly and speaking firmly, speaking confidently, speaking aggressively. These are all contexts. There are all kinds of contexts where that is the necessary response, and the response that's most in conformity with the Quran and Sunnah. So we have to recognize that and be a little bit more sophisticated and strategic about how we talk about Islam and how we bring our discourse into the public space. And so these are hopefully useful reflections for you. And if you liked this video, feel free to like and share it, and subscribe to the channel, and also put questions that you might have in the comment section, and in future videos I'll try to address some of these questions in videos like this. So feel free to comment, and Jazakallah khair for watching.